welcome to the Nature Tech in Action. Really great to see all your faces. Warm welcome to anyone who hasn't been here before. And if you haven't already, please rename yourselves in the Zoom with your name, your organization. This is also a space to kind of connect and see who else is interested in these subjects. Also really incredibly helpful for the Q&A section afterwards. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Paige. I lead the community at the Nature Tech Collective. We're a global community of innovators in nature tech, and our mission is to accelerate a nature-positive future by fostering collaboration, sharing knowledge across the entire nature tech ecosystem. Our members are people who are measuring nature, restoring nature, or funding the restoration of nature. We span the whole ecosystem. And today we're diving into a story of restoration that balances deep personal roots with global financial mechanisms. So we're joined by Jenny Cheong-Sang from Wovoka. And she's going to tell us about a project in one of the most ecologically significant landscapes on the planet. It's the island of Mindoro in the Philippines, and it's a critical biodiversity corridor. I won't go too much into the context, but what's going to happen is that we're going to have a 30-minute fireside chat right now. We're going to go into the Q&A at minute 35, perhaps, have about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A, and then a breakout rooms at the very end. Now, if you don't want to go into breakout rooms, you have an opportunity to hop out, but for the ones that do want to stay, you can connect one-on-one and meet people a little more deeply at the end of the session. So let's start. Jenny, thank you so much for coming. You grew up on this island and in the exact landscape that you're restoring. Can you tell us a little bit more about the origin story of this project and why you're involved in it?
Thanks, Paige, and good morning, everyone, from my side of the world. Good evening, good afternoon, and hey, Sarah. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I would very much like to walk everyone through the project and share a bit about the behind the scenes of how we're developing this project. So let me just share my slide a bit. Wait. Okay. Oops. Can everyone see this?
Yes, we can, though we can also see your speaker notes.
Okay. Huh. Okay.
And if it's too tricky, we can also go back to the option of Zara helping us screen share.
Can we try that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Okay.
will share my screen now. Perfect. Can you guys see that?
Not yet.
You see it, maybe just go to slideshow.
Okay, good. This was working earlier. Zara?
Yeah. Sorry, give me 2 seconds. I'll try again. Can you see that now?
Well, we can't see the slideshow-ish, but we can see the slides. So maybe we'll have to make do.
Can you try to click slideshow. And
There we go.
there. Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, how about we go to the next slide?
Terrific.
There. Okay.
And just to recontextualize, we're just trying to get into the origin story of you, Jenny, who grew up here, and the project.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess it's a bit of a mix of like a high level strategy and like right place, right time, right people moments. And because I grew up there in the island, I know that Mindoro is like a total biodiversity heavyweight, and it's facing some serious challenges. And there's really a lot of like unique biodiversity and forest ecosystem that it hosts. And we thought that it would be a perfect area for restoration. Well, for one, it's adjacent to the center of the world marine shorefish biodiversity. So there's a connection for like reef to ridge restoration approach, and then there's for like one of the provinces alone, there's already like 15,000 hectares of scoping area, but the total island is like around 230,000 hectares of like forest scoping of ARR eligible areas. And then of course there were a lot of like additional analysis done on the land tenures, because we also had to secure the long-term permanence of the area. And so we had to make sure that there are land tenures in place for us to be able to secure community buy-in and stakeholders buy-in, of course, so that we have the government and the community and the NGOs and CSOs working together with us as we design the project. And then when we expand to the other side of the island, it's another province. So there's a huge potential expansion there. And there we can form like basically an island-wide restoration approach. And it's very like logistically, I guess, it works well logistically because it's only like few hundred kilometers away from the main city of Manila. And the road access in these areas are pretty well maintained compared to other sides of the Philippines. And there's a unique community value in the area because there are IPs, indigenous peoples, indigenous cultural communities in the area. And I grew up with them. My mom has worked with them before when she was still a social worker. So, context wise, there's really a lot of like we see a lot of potential in this area and its people. And yeah, we want to be able to apply ancestral knowledge, and of course modern science into developing the area.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Jenny. And
so
what you're
yeah.
doing here is essentially reforestation, right? And
Mhm.
in this little green corridor that we're seeing on the middle of the island, are those the areas that you're addressing?
No, those are that's the mountain range that dividing the two provinces.
I
So
see.
those are well, I guess the areas with current forest patches that we can um like restore to make into a biodiversity corridor, basically.
And what are the biggest drivers of deforestation in the area?
Can we switch to the, I guess, slide slide 4? Next one. There, the other one. Previous slide, please. Slide 4. It already popped before. Hmm. No, previous slide. There. So yeah, so starting with the early 1900s, the island has already become a major timber producing province. But until now, there are socioeconomic and environmental pressures that's still occurring to date. And these include like illegal logging, slash and burn farming. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar. So basically, you cut down some areas of the forest, and then you burn them, and then sometimes you make like charcoal production or turn the area into agricultural areas where you can plant agricultural crops or like root crops that the communities turn into their like everyday source of food or income. And then of course there's poverty, which basically drives the whole land conversion. Because they have to, people have to feed their family and be able to bring food on their table. And so they have to rely to what's ever available in their surroundings. And so, forest is one of those things that usually suffer when there's a lot of like poverty going on around the area.
Yeah, I see that. And thank you for those pictures, very illustrative. And so what is it that Wovoka does? Like, what's your intervention, particularly in this context?
Yeah, so how we flip the conversations that we aren't just telling people to, hey, stop cutting trees. Instead we do like a participatory mapping where communities decide which areas to restore, because they also have their um sacred grounds or like areas we can't really touch, and then degraded areas that we can probably like restore and replant again. And this basically like reduces the need to encroach into protected forest edges if you have like certain areas that are designated for certain activities. So that's very important. And we also employ multi-strata planting, so like employing agroforestry. And because we are growing like high value crops, like for example, cacao and coffee alongside native trees, we can improve the yield on existing plots. And so they don't have to clear new land. So basically they can earn from what they're planting. And so they don't have to really rely on, cutting trees and making charcoals for their everyday expenses.
And one of the things that we talked about in preparation for this is that it's tough for reforestation projects to be insured longer than maybe 3 years. How is it that you're um, helping these landscape stay alive and reforested for, I think it was 30 to 40 years, your strategic kind of vision?
Yeah. If you could just go to the next slide, Sarah, please. There. So I think I've already mentioned like proactive management strategy. So putting in like green fire breaks, um like agroforestry. So that's one of the things that to incentivize the people, right? So instead of just the usual like 3 years of because there's a program by the government called the National Greening Program, and typically just lasts for like 3 years, 5 years max if there's like monitoring and maintenance included. In our area, we have to like include like long-term plans. For example, if we go to the next slide. So the project has like 40-year lifespan. We well the credits will be generated for just 30 years according to our model, but the maintenance of the forest, the monitoring activities, it lasts for like 40 years total. And it's important for us to partner with like indigenous peoples and local communities with long-term land tenure, as I mentioned before. And then we work closely with the government to well, number one, to ensure the land tenure, because they they're the ones permitting the development in the areas, right? And then we partner with communities, so basically they're not just the laborers, they're co-owners of these projects. And so we co-design all the project activities with them. So we make sure like we ask them, hey, how can we ensure that the survival will be ensured through like 40 years, and slowly we build onto that. And then we put in some patrolling activities, and then we plan the timeline, like how long do you think we need to patrol these areas and that areas. And so, it's really a process, a continuous dialogue with the community. And when you um, instill with the community that they have like literal stake in this project, um, they would be incentivized to protect their forest because they have their socioeconomic like livelihood, alternative livelihood in that forest, like baked into the project. They will be incentivized to protect what's theirs. So it's not just like Woboka project now. It's basically our forest, and it's a living project. It's our forest. The communities benefit from this, so we have to protect it. So yeah, so that's basically how we build it. And of course, we have to take care of the permanence issue by aligning with like existing policy. So we have to go through like
Right.
the full pre prior informed consent process, or the FPIC process, and then have to work closely with the government so they can also like help us with the monitoring and patrolling. So it's really a confluence of efforts from different stakeholders.
Fantastic. We'll get to that. But before, obviously, you pay the project through international carbon finance. How does that help in terms of the
Mhm.
stability of the local communities and how you can kind of assure the permanence of the project?
Yeah, so for one, the the project creates job in conservation, right? So we employ the communities in the project for like patrolling activities, nursery, and so we bake in some budget for that. And we of course we do the fundraise. There's a need for like capital at first to fund these activities, and then with that we also try to incubate like community businesses, development of non-timber forest products, for example. And then the carbon revenues basically like bridge the financing gap. So it provides the upfront capital for payment of community benefits, for example, and to pay them to do like the actual planting activities, because of course they have to abandon their like day-to-day job, right? So you also have to make sure that they're earning like upfront in the restoration activities. So they're more incentivized to participate in the project. And basically, if they maintain the project, it makes the standing trees more valuable than cleared land, you know.
Absolutely. And what is it that the local communities are planting? What kind of socioeconomic activities or non-timber products are you developing there?
I think I have a slide there somewhere. Can you turn to the next slide? No, next one. Slide 10. Almost there. There. So we have this we're trying to develop this hub. It's called Arawatan Hub. It's basically for making sure that we use the land sustainably, and we try to empower communities um to steward the land beyond the planting period. So we we envision like a one-stop shop center serving as like a marketplace for non-timber forest products, and try to build the community with the rest of the world through the hub. And so there's the community enterprise there. At the moment, we're still like doing some research and development, but there are very interesting products in the area. So since there's forest, of course, there's honey, for example, and you have herbal teas and coffee and cacao. So those agroforestry products are also like part of the project. There's fruit trees that they can harvest yearly, and it's very strategic because the area that we chose is actually considered like the fruit basket of the region. So there's really a lot of like fruit trees growing in the area, and we could just like like set aside certain part of the project specifically for like fruit trees. So at the moment, the design is like 30% agroforestry, and so that would be located in like the border of the restoration area. So we can make sure that there are people always in the area. So basically, they're also doing the protection of the forest
Mm.
as they take care of the agroforestry area, because there's always people based in the site. So, we can reduce encroachment and logging activities, etc.
So let's get into that. What is your kind of current technology stack for monitoring and reporting and verification, MRV?
Right. So let's try to go to slide 15. Um, yep. One more and last one. Okay, so basically we try to combine high-level satellite data with like real, boots on the ground field work to make sure that our monitoring activities is as solid as it gets. So basically we keep the community-facing MRV tech in-house. So this includes like field monitoring protocols. We have geotagging activities. We have like smartphones equipped with like low bandwidth apps where that the communities can use on the ground when they take like photos of the trees, photos of illegal activities on the ground, and then like real those data will be sent to us real time. So those things are like in-house. And then we also have like drones for aerial surveys. So aside from the mobile apps, we also have like camera traps and then audio mods for like biodiversity monitoring. And then we partner with local NGOs and academic institutions to ensure that our MRV process or monitoring activities on the ground are grounded in real solid science. And then for DMRV, we and nature tech integration, we partner with third party service providers. For one, we have Canop. Shout out to you guys.
Mhm.
They did the stocking index and carbon modeling for us, and so now we are complementing that with more field validations. And to because we're also doing like dynamic baselining, right? And so we have to make sure that there's um updated data being fed into the model. So yeah.
Terrific, thanks.
Um,
I see we have a bunch of really good questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask you, I think maybe two more questions, and then we'll move into the Q&A. But how is it that you decide which tools to develop in-house versus through
mhm.
partnerships?
Yeah, so I think we have some certain capabilities in-house for like satellite data generation and um well, like all the things that involves groundwork. So we keep those things in-house. And then for like specialized um I guess highly specialized technical nature tech integration, we partner with third parties. Like for example, it like I mentioned in the generation of our for dynamic baselining, for example, we use like Canop's AI agents and algorithms to process like synthetic aperture data. So I think those are like much more technical, I guess. And so we have to like um outsource these services from third party who are more like known globally. They have this credibility built already, and so we are actually very like we are quite picky with who we partner also, because we only want to develop like high integrity carbon removals project. And so we have to make sure that everything is like grounded on science and backed by solid data. So yeah.
Of course. And just to kind of close up this portion of the webinar, as we're in 2026, what are the biggest challenges you're anticipating in scaling
Oh
Mindor?
yeah. Now that you mentioned Well, we're actually like keeping close watch on certain like scaling points, and scaling pains. And for one, we're still like the Philippines in general is like figuring out the legal landscape for forest carbon in general.
Mm.
And at the moment, we're encountering like some bottlenecks in securing like MOA. Well, just due to like the bureaucratic nature of the Philippine government in general. And also like as we expand to like the bigger island-wide vision, it would involve like several ancestral domains and it would require like meticulous epic process. And it's a very slow, delicate process that we just, can't simply rush. And of course, training communities, this is a 10,000, 100,000 hectare island-wide restoration activity. So we have to train communities very closely to meet international standards. And that's a huge educational mission. And more importantly, securing, major investment. So I guess that's the steepest hill to climb, especially in the early days of, such high impact project. And I guess this is also, the why for investors because, their money is basically the missing piece that makes this restoration vision possible.
Thanks, Jenny, so much. I see you have some great slides. Maybe we can share them as well with when we share the recording.
Mhm.
And so what we're going to do is allow the audience to unmute themselves in the settings and kind of move to the Q&A portion of this session. And I think we already have one or two in the chat. We'll give them priority. So I think Bea from Amazon Investor Coalition has a long paragraph that you can read, but I don't think she's here to kind of say that out loud. So the next one goes to Art Restrepo from Ecotropics. Do you mind coming on camera and maybe on microphone?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Hi, Art. Hello.
Hi, Jeannie. Hi, how are you doing? Yeah, so my question, it's more into the permanence of these type of
Mhm.
projects. The land ownership, it's owned by the government, it's private. How
Mhm.
does it's a big challenge for this project, so how your company is managing it?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. So, so there's, I guess, in our project, there's two very clear ownership scheme, right? So in public forest lands, so there's public forest lands and ancestral domains. So basically, public forest lands are everything that's untenured, and the ancestral domains are basically areas that are owned by the indigenous communities. And so our project is a combination of both. So we are engaging with the national government for public forest lands, and they have the community-based forest management agreement with the communities that we are partnering with. Um, and so the land tenure is granted by the national government through the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And then they're given to the people's organizations who we can directly work with in these areas. Now, for us to be able to, have the right to develop in these areas, we have to secure a memorandum of agreement with the national government
Tengo
and
ganas de
the
hacer una
community.
pregunta, a lo mejor, y tú estás haciendo.
Sorry.
Thanks, Eduardo.
So a multi-partite MOA with the community and the government for us to be able to like even proceed with the conduct of the feasibility um up to the implementation of the project. So there's a lot of like a series of I guess agreements that we have to go through to make sure that the permanence is there. And for ancestral domains, it's more direct to the point because the owners are the communities, the indigenous communities. So we have to go through, well, this one is a tedious process, though it's a more direct to the point. We just have to undergo the entire free prior informed consent process, or the FPIC process, to make sure that everyone's on board, everyone's agreeing on the whole project design, and they're freely participating in the project. And then after the FPIC process, we can have like a go no go kind of agreement with them. And so there's a project development agreement that we sign with these communities, basically signifying that we are on board, we want to work with you, we want to work with the VOCA, and these are the responsibilities and the roles of all the parties. So it's everything's on paper, basically. Does that answer your question?
Sure. Thank you. Big challenge there. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Jenny. And next question is from Gilad Gorin from Nature Tech Collective, of course. Do you want to say that one out loud?
It's really loud where I'm at, so I'll do really quick. I'm just wondering where your financing is coming from. Do you need more? What's your kind of plan for scale? Yeah.
Great question. Yeah, so at the moment we have secured some funding for some parts of the the early process, project design, and the pilot activities. So that would the total funding that we have secured is around like $1 million. But the entire project would need like tens of millions for the entire project lifespan. And so we are currently raising some funds. So there are different platforms for the early phase of planting activities. We are also, we welcome like CSR engagements, like partnerships, and we also do so since we are partnering with NGOs, academic institutions, we also do like grants. So for certain like for example, baselining activities and other technical work. And of course, we try to approach like other investors as well. So we are in active engagement with investors like hummingbirds, for example, and other, big institutions to unlock like the bigger, capex that we need to build the entire, well, at least for the first 5 years, because we need to be able to plant the entire forest, the target first. And then, once the project reaches a certain stage wherein it can be self-sustaining, then we can start paying up the investors. So yeah, so in short, we're still looking for investment. So if any of you guys if that speaks to you, maybe we can have a chat later on. We would very much like to walk you through the project and hopefully build this one with you. Yeah.
You can put a call out as well in all our newsletters. Completely unrelated, I have the most incredible hummingbird outside drinking out of a bird of paradise. So
Oh, cool.
little word association there. Do we have any more questions from the audience? And if not, Amaury from Canop, I see you're in the room as well. I'm really curious if kind of you can both, Jenny and Amaury, give us more context about how you got in touch and how the partnership started, and kind of where is it going now?
For Canop, we're still doing like dynamic baselining with them. We actually need to give them some data from the ground, and we're still like conducting, the field validations. Well, that's our target for the first quarter. And we are very thankful for Canop for being so patient with us, because this engagement in Mindoro has already like it began early last year. So it's 1 year 1 year strong. And so yeah, we're very thankful for all the support assistance extended to us, like beyond, beyond the engagement itself. And they've been very helpful in, navigating all the tech requirements for, dynamic baselining, and they're also doing the abacus alignment for us. So, um those things we can't do in house, but we're very lucky, I guess, to have found, Kano, and um walk with us in building the MRV aspect of this project.
Absolutely. It's complicated stuff. Amaury,
Yeah.
if you don't mind giving actually even a little bit more color about everything that you're doing together, I'm super curious.
Absolutely. Well, I've not worked directly with Wovoka like on this, so I was curious also to join this webinar to get a bit
Okay.
more context. Like it's mostly Victor in our team, like in direct contact with you, but I work on automating the dynamic baseline process,
Mhm.
so it's definitely very interesting to get some more insights.
Yeah. Oh yeah, just please wait on the data validated, the ground validated data. We would be able to like send them to you once we're done with the fieldworks.
That's
Fantastic.
perfect.
All right. Sorry, putting you on the spot. I just thought it could be fun.
No worries.
All right. Do we have any more questions?
This is LJ Sensley.
Hi, LJ.
Thank you so much for this. Let me come off camera. So there's so many great things with this, and I love to see what's happening there. So how often do people come to see the project to see what's happening for themselves?
Well, we have a team based in the island itself. So well, while I grew up there, so I had a lot of connections in the area, and then we have our project lead now, directly working with the community. So he's based there. We have a headquarters in the island, and there's almost like an everyday interaction with the community, especially now because we're doing the pilot activities. So we oversee the entire process. We're like almost like based in the area every day. Yeah, doing some restoration work. So it will be the setup will be like this for like a long while because we are trying to like slow roll the planting activities. So
Yeah.
we started 20 hectares last year, and then we are targeting more activities this year. So yeah, I think we're not going anywhere. So we're just literally in the island.
Yeah, no, I would love to see it, and I'm sure others would as well. So congratulations and good luck.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And Jenny, before I put us all into kind of breakout rooms for those who want to stay and connect more deeply, I'm actually really curious how you involve the community in the monitoring of the landscape. Are they using any of the technologies, or are they trained on anything? And yeah.
Mhm. So at the moment, well, we don't have any monitoring activities now because we're still like doing the planting activities at the moment. But prior to that, there's a lot of like community trainings and sessions. For example, for doing like geotagging activities because we need to do that before any planting activities, right? So we have our project lead in the community lead in the area doing the training with the people's organizations. So we started with just two people's organization with like 20-50 members, and then we had a consultation meeting with them. So it almost like happens almost regularly now. And then we try to train them like how to do like geotagging activities. And we have like materials translated in the local language. And then like it's a practical I guess training for the people. And then the they get trained on site. And so, they're actually doing the training like on the job. So, and then our our community guy, he sends us those data, and then we try to plug it in our mapping activities, and so we can see the actual like how the area looks like real time. So yeah, and then for the monitoring activities, there some of these communities are actually like based in the parcels of lands where the restoration activities are occurring. So they have like little huts in the area, because they have some like alternative livelihood going on in those areas. And so we try to incentivize these people to, try to monitor their areas for like logging activities. And we also try to engage them in like forest inventory, so they know the local names of these trees, like the existing ones. And so once we have the local names, we just, try to bridge that with our science. And so like for local names, we try to look for the scientific names. So it's like um local communities working with our foresters, to make a beautiful story of restoration. So there's a lot of like local and traditional knowledge sharing between us and the community.
That's lovely.